In a distant country, there lived a king and queen who longed to have a child. So they prayed to God sincerely. "Oh God, we are all good kings and queens. Please give us a child." Away. Soon after, the queen gave birth to a lovely little princess. The girl's skin was as white as snow, and her cheeks were as red as apples. The king and queen named her Snow White. People all over the country deeply blessed Snow White. Under the love of the king and queen, Snow White gradually grew up and finally became a beautiful girl loved by everyone. Snow White is very kind and caring. She often plays with animals, forest animals, such as deer, rabbits, squirrels, and birds. All like to be close to Snow White because Snow White will give them food and tell them stories. Snow White, who has a kind-hearted personality and is like an angel, lives a happy life. However, the good times did not last long. Snow White's mother fell ill and died. And the king married a new queen for Snow White, but the new queen was a witch who was proficient in magic. Although she is very beautiful, she has a very proud and violent personality. Especially, she hates others being more beautiful than her. This is your new queen, mother. When the king introduced the new queen to Snow White, she was still grieving for her dead mother. The new queen has a very strange mirror, from which you can get all the answers you want to know. Therefore, the queen often looks into the mirror and asks, "Mirror, mirror, who is the most beautiful woman in the world?" The most beautiful woman in the world is you, queen. However, one day, when the queen asked the magic mirror the same question again, the magic mirror replied, "Now Snow White is more beautiful than you." The new queen was very angry when she heard this. How can someone be more beautiful than me? I must get rid of her. So she ordered the palace warriors to say, "I don't want to see Snow White anymore. You find an excuse to take her to the forest and kill her secretly. After killing her, bring her heart and tongue back as evidence that you killed her. Do you hear me? There can be no mistakes." "Yes, queen." After the warrior heard this, he really took Snow White to the forest. When the warrior drew his sword to kill the princess, he saw the princess who was picking flowers. She was pure, kind, and like an angel. The warrior couldn't bear to kill her, so he said to Snow White, "Queen ordered me to kill you, princess, but I really can't bring myself to do it, so you'd better run away into the forest." After speaking, the warrior returned to the palace. Snow White, who heard the hoot of an owl, felt that the forest was more and more scary as she walked. Suddenly, there was a small wooden house in front of him, so he shouted in surprise and joy, "It's a cabin." Snow White hurried forward and knocked on the door, but no one came to open the door. She opened the door on her own initiative. After entering the cabin, there were 7 small beds neatly arranged inside. Snow White felt very tired after running in the forest for a day. So she lay down on the 7 small beds and fell asleep unconsciously. In the evening, when the 7 dwarfs came back with hoes, they found that someone was in their home and sleeping in their own beds. Everyone asked strangely, "Who is this beautiful girl? She sleeps so soundly. This little girl is so beautiful." The voices of the dwarfs talking among themselves woke up Snow White. The dwarf said angrily, "Why did you break into our house?" "Gentlemen, I'm really sorry, because I got lost in the forest. After walking all day, I was really hungry and tired. When I saw this hut, I walked in to rest." Snow White told the dwarf exactly what happened. The dwarfs were very sympathetic to Snow White's plight and left her alone. "You can live here." When Snow White heard that the dwarf was willing to keep her, she was very happy and said, Thank you so much. I am willing to cook, make beds, wash clothes, and clean here for you. I am willing to do everything for you. Welcome. This is your home from now on. Snow White cleans the cabin very clean every day. When the 7 dwarfs came back from the forest, a delicious dinner was waiting for them. In this way, day after day, the new queen thought Snow White was dead. One day, she asked the magic mirror, "Mirror, mirror, who is the most beautiful person in the world?" The magic mirror answered the queen, "Queen, you are very beautiful, but Snow White is more beautiful than you. She now lives a happy life in the forest with the 7 dwarfs." After hearing this answer, the queen realized that Snow White was not dead, and she felt very angry. "It's so abominable. We must let Snow White disappear from the world." The evil-hearted queen came up with a way. She smeared the poison she prepared on the outside of the bright red apple, preparing to poison Snow White. Hey, if Snow White takes one bite of this poisonous apple, she will definitely die. By then, I will be the most beautiful woman in the world." Then, the queen dressed up as an old woman, carrying a basket of apples, went to the forest. The bad queen came to the dwarf's cabin with a basket of apples. "My dear little girl, would you like to buy a red and fragrant apple? I'll give you one to eat. I believe you will like it." Snow White, who always liked eating apples, saw the red and big apples and said happily, "Wow, this red apple is so cute. It must be delicious." So Snow White reached out and took the apple. As a result, Snow White just took a bite and immediately fell to the ground and passed out. When the evil queen saw her falling to the ground, she laughed and said, "Snow White will disappear from this world from now on." When the dwarfs came home in the evening, they saw Snow White lying on the ground, as if dead. They immediately lifted her to the bed and tried their best to save her, but Snow White still didn't wake up. The dwarfs cried and put Snow White in a glass coffin filled with flowers, preparing for a grand funeral. At this time, the prince of a neighboring country happened to pass by the forest and saw the beautiful and lovely princess in the glass coffin, as well as the dwarfs and small animals mourning nearby. After the prince knew what happened, he looked at Snow White sadly, with tears in his eyes, and said, "Poor princess, it would be great if you could be resurrected." The prince presented a bouquet to Snow White, stared at her lovingly, and said, her skin was snow white, and her cheeks were rosy, as if she were asleep. She didn't look like a dead person at all. Finally, the prince couldn't help but leaned over and kissed her. Suddenly, Snow White spit out the apple she had eaten. It turned out that it was the prince's love for the princess that made the poison apple lose its effectiveness. The princess gradually recovered her body temperature and opened her bright eyes. Snow White woke up, as if she had woken up from a long sleep. Her cheeks and lips were still so rosy. "Wow! Did you see it? Snow White is alive. Snow White is resurrected." The dwarfs were all jumping for joy and shouting excitedly. The prince said happily, "It's so great. Snow White is reborn. God really won't let me down." Even the animals nearby were chattering away. After the prince explained his origin to Snow White, he held the princess's hands and said softly, "Princess, are you willing to go back to the palace with me and be my princess?" Snow White nodded shyly and agreed. The dwarfs and forest animals, some dancing and some singing, celebrated the prince and Snow White. "I wish the prince and princess happiness forever." The prince took Snow White and rode a white horse to say goodbye to the dwarfs and the animals in the forest. They kept looking back and waving goodbye to the dwarfs. "Thank you for taking care of me. I will always remember you. I wish you happiness. Goodbye." After they left the forest and returned to neighboring countries, they were immediately welcomed by the people of the country. In the eyes of the people, they were a perfect match. Ever since she poisoned Snow White, the evil queen thought that Snow White would definitely die, so she was very happy. One day, she asked the magic mirror confidently, magic mirror, I should be the most beautiful person in the world now." The magic mirror replied, "Besides Snow White, you are the most beautiful person, but Snow White living in a neighboring country is thousands of times more beautiful than you." The queen felt very strange when she heard this. Didn't she think Snow White was killed by her? But then, I thought that Snow White had always been very lucky. This is so infuriating. I don't believe that Snow White can't be killed. The queen was originally a witch, so she rode a magic broom and took a magic sword to fly to neighboring countries to get rid of the thorn at her side. When she flew over the neighboring country, a bolt of lightning suddenly struck the bad queen. A loud noise knocked the witch queen off her broom. The witch queen was finally punished by God and ended her evil-doing life. At this time, the prince's country was rejoicing because the beautiful Snow White agreed to the prince's proposal and was holding a grand wedding. The dwarfs and forest animals were also invited to the wedding. With the blessings of the people across the country, the prince and Snow White lived happily together forever.